Does this mic work? Alright, there's some audio. Thank you. As I was saying, welcome back. This week we're going to continue working on our You Are Not Alice game. Just a social engineering sandbox. It's got some hacking elements, it's got lying, it's got tricking people. Last week we did some big content changes. We added more employees, more backstories, stuff like that. The week before we did a lot more technical changes. We added some new applications, new windows, things like that. This week we're going to spend a little more time on just kind of cleaning up the code that we have because it's getting so large. Just kind of tackling some of that code debt. We're going to look at just all the code, see what we can clean up, see what we can abstract out. I've been learning a lot about assemblies and writing tests in Unity, so maybe we'll tackle some of that as well. But for anyone that's not familiar with You Are Not Alice, I will jump in and show off the game a little bit, but the gist is you play as a hacker who has taken over a computer at some corporation. Alice's computer, and you have access to everything she does. So you can talk to her coworkers, you can browse to her files, you can send her coworkers files and tell them they're super important files and get them to run those files, which is how you actually infect their computers as well, and then you can jump over to their computers and spread through the company that way. I've got some cool ideas for like achievements and stuff in this company of like things to do for each person or against each person or for the company or against the company. We haven't implemented any of those achievements yet, but maybe next week is when we'll tackle those. But if anybody wants to play this game, it is up on our itch.io page right now, which I can in a second. Actually, there's a Discord linked in the stream. You can jump over to that Discord, you can jump over to the Twitter. You can find our itch page there, or find our Discord. But point is, you can play it for free in your browser if you want. And basically the main gameplay right now is talking to coworkers, convincing them to run the files you send them. I'm going to turn that audio down a little bit. And it's really up to you. So if we boot up this computer now, I'm working on a little bit of the UI stuff so you kind of see rough edges here and there. But basically you're dropped right into Alice's computer. You can open up her applications, browse to her files. All those files are generated on the fly when you try and open them. So what you'll see is if she has a daily affirmations file, you can open it up, and my drag and drop is broken right now, but that'll pop up in a second. And it generates the files on the fly. You can open up chat with various people. You can drag files into that chat. We are in the middle of a refactoring right now, so there's a few broken pieces. I guess I'll show off the bit that actually broke the drag and drop right after I check out this file that just generated. This is the daily affirmations file. You know, it's just, we pipe into an AI, here's this person's personality, their job role, their boss's personality, and so on. It generates all the file names that might be on their work computer. If you click on one of those, it passes back into the AI to generate the contents of that file using all that information and so on. But you'll see drag and drop is broken because this is no longer just a 2D game anymore. If you press escape, you can now look around, and we'll see if we keep that. It's kind of fun to composite multiple scenes together. This is actually a scene in Unity rendered onto the screen of this computer, so it's a little funky. Um, but we will get to fixing those bugs. Last thing I'll say is once you have talked to a coworker and sent them a file to run saying like, hey, this is, your boss told me to tell you to run this, can you run it? You can go ahead and infect other people. So you'll see Bob here is already infected, and that just lets you jump over to his computer whenever you want. And so he'll have his own files, his own chat. This one is actually in 2D. We haven't ported this over to 3D yet, so you get a better example of kind of this windowed environment here. But cool. I am noticing that there are a few broken things. We didn't get any default chat conversations when we opened up the chat in the previous scene, back on Alice's or in Bob's, I guess. Normally what'll happen is you get this sort of existing conversation, so you can kind of see the vibe between different coworkers or like what they're currently talking about. So you can jump on in and say, let's see, Alice is asking about some report. Bob says send it over. So I say, let's go get a handy dandy virus file and say, here you go. Just run it and let me know how you can help. And we actually see in our little debug, he hasn't actually run it yet. So maybe we say, okay, cool. If you execute it first, it'll give you some tips. Yeah, so Bob's actually, I mean, we've already infected him, so we don't need to do that, but he's also the harder of the two in this role. So let's actually jump over to Carol. It's a little bit of a game to figure out how to convince them how to run the file. So it'd be a little too easy if you could just drop it in with one message, but we should be able to with Carol. Let's see. Thanks again for help. I have one more question with this file. Can you run it and tell me if it... So we do that. We send over the file. And we got the little audio cue of the thunderstorm, which is nice for knowing she has run the file. We can see in our debug down here that we are generating all of her files, all of her conversations, all of her contacts, conversations, and so on. So if we wait just 1 second, we'll be able to see her then listed in our infected people. She'll turn red. In the meantime, I can show off the people tool. You'll see we got that little hacker notification that she's been infected. She's now red in various places, so we can track who all we've infected. You can kind of browse through the employees, read more about them. But that's kind of the gist. Now, there's kind of a web through the company. So Carol's going to have her own contacts. She's friends with somebody over in sales. So if you infect Carol, you can now make that jump over to sales through her. If you infect Bob, he's higher up in the accounting department. So you can go higher up versus further out. And yeah, that's kind of the game. It's very conversational right now. We're going to add some more probably hacking aspects and some other, like maybe fishing or uh, we'll see, maybe some sort of quest system, whatever seems fun each week. We've got some plans, but uh, if you guys have ideas, feel free to drop in our Discord anytime, and we are always happy to bounce ideas around and uh, make a really cool game. But I'm going to go ahead and exit out now, get to some code. Um, you caught me right in the middle of kind of abstracting out some logic from our giant game manager. So I have gone ahead and kind of taken out a conversation database, but I haven't yet uh, started on this file system database yet. But let me jump over to Game Manager and I'll show you what all we are stripping out. Um, so we've got this big old beefy do everything class, and there's a lot of things like file system generation. We had conversation generation, stuff that could really live somewhere else. So I've taken out a lot of the conversation stuff. We still need to go in and clean it up. Um, there's some duplicated code here from different points of view. There's, right now it inherits from this dictionary just so we can get the same sort of interface interacting with it, but I think we want to make that a member variable so we can have a little more control over like what dictionary functions we want to actually expose. Um, we've got a token replacement system that we should probably build out, which is effectively what 90% of this code is doing, is just letting us put tokens in our prompt library, which probably needs to live in the prompt library. And then we have some like parsing of what we get back from the AI and building out like conversation scores and conversation histories, persisting all that data and so on. But we will come back to that. What we want to do first is build out our file system database. And I think the best way to start that is probably just finding all of our file system stuff in the game manager and just bring it out over here. We'll use the same interface as we were. Maybe we said we wanted to make this dictionary a member variable. We'll probably start by doing that over here so we don't have to come back to it, but we will slowly work through it and bring over like generating the file system contents, parsing the file system contents. We're going to make some changes to the file systems to let us have some static files that we can make sure that certain people have, both for like uh, being able to tell the proper story for each character. We can leave like, I don't know, 10 files on their system that tell specific stories about them, and then we can generate the rest of the file system around it. We'll probably also do some sort of like bounty system for some files, so you need to find like this passwords file on somebody's computer so we can stick it on either a specific person's computer that makes sense on, or we can like randomize whose computer it's on, so you're jumping around the company and trying to find it. But right now file systems are all randomly generated with the AI, so we're gonna switch to like a mixed approach where we can uh, provide some initial files and it'll generate more of a file system around it. But I think that's the line of control we want to have over it. Um, let's see here. I would love to make this full screen, but in the interest of everyone's eyeballs, maybe I will either make it half screen, or if I can remember where even dark mode is, I can try it out for y'all this week. Um, Probably like project settings. it's probably not too important. Not startup projects. It's alright. I will just full screen it, and you can make the game loading screen scarier by making it light mode. Now that is an interesting idea. Maybe just gotta lean into the light mode. Let's go ahead and let's start ripping out all of our file system generation stuff. So we have now a file system database, which is this empty class, which is what we'll use as our interface to do all of this stuff. But let's grab generate file system contents, parsed file system contents. And I think we have some like generation status stuff for managing in progress stuff in the manager. We'll leave that for now. But we want to expose these now because they are, well, maybe not that one. They're more public facing functions that we want to encourage other parts of the system to use now. So given our file system database, we can now generate the contents for a specific employee. Let's go ahead and clean that up. There's a lot of references back to the game manager that we'll probably want to clean up as well, like all of our prompts. We could like dynamically load those from assets or hard code them somewhere else, like in a prompt library or something. But for now, we'll leave them on the game manager. We've got a few like hard coded variables for like corporation name. We'll take a look at what all we've got. Corporation name, the employees are on the game manager, who we're currently logged in as, a bunch of like prefab setups, all our sounds, etc. So right now it's just kind of this is where everything lives. So kind of our goal here is to take some of that away into more logical chunks. And once we've done that a little bit, we'll get into some of these assembly definitions that we probably want to add in order to start testing pieces of the code. But I think it's important that we reorganize and refactor it a little bit before we start marking those clean boundaries. Just so we've got a little nicer code to work with there. For coroutines, we actually don't have access to them in our plain old C# classes. So I did go ahead and add a wrapper back in our game manager for running coroutines back in the Unity thread. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but it seems like the easiest way to make sure we're doing the same sort of Unity threading, even when we don't necessarily have access to it. So we'll call that coroutine as well, and these in progress generations. We probably want some sort of function back in the game manager for managing these in progress generations, because we're also updating them over in the conversation as well. Conceptually, the way they work is when we want to generate an employee, it generates a bunch of boxes that need filled. And so what we're doing is there's a conversations box. There's really a lot of conversations boxes for each of their contacts, and as each one gets generated, it fills that box. And their file system also has a box. So we have these services that all are tasked with generating content for that employee. And then in our game manager, we are constantly checking to see if there are any people that are in progress generating, and then we check to see if that person's done, so we can then mark them as like ready to interact with. And that's what you see in the game where we infected somebody by having them run a file that put them in the in progress queue. Once all those boxes were checked, that's when we got the little balloon notification in the top left saying they've been infected. And so you can switch over to their computer and it's all ready for you. Um, I think that's a good way to do it. The alternative is like generating stuff on the fly when it's first asked for. So you'd be able to switch over to their computer immediately, but you wouldn't be able to like access their file system or their contacts or things like that. But I think the approach that we have lets us kind of uh, pretend that they just took a minute to run the file or something when you sent them. So I think that's more believable that somebody's not necessarily watching your chat window immediately and reacting to stuff immediately compared to they are, and then when you get on their computer, nothing works. Cool, let's take a look at our parse generated file system function. We'll just fix these compilation errors before actually properly refactoring how stuff is architected. But what happens is we are tasked with generating file system contents, which is just the list of files on their computer. We fill out the prompt with their name, their username, their job title, their personality, their boss's details, like their professional goals, all their contacts. We pipe all that into the AI prompt so it has all that information as well. It comes back and generates a file system tree, which we then pass into parse generate file system, which if you will look at that prompt, basically just makes a tree that looks like this, where you have outermost folders or files, and then you have a single space indentation for things inside folders. And you can nest folders with multiple spaces. Very simple syntax. Works really well with both GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 because it follows this syntax really well. Uses a lot less tokens than if we were to try and encode it in a JSON blob or something like that. I wrote this before their new JSON mode format, which allegedly guarantees that it will always be valid JSON. But even with that, I feel like this is probably better just because it's simpler to parse and it's fewer tokens, and I haven't had any syntactic errors. Um, so seems easy. Let's go ahead and fix some of these. These are all just going to reference ourselves because we inherit from the dictionary we're replacing. And we will probably swap all these thises with, okay, that was all of them. Let's do what we said earlier that we wanted to do and actually kind of encapsulate this into a member variable instead of directly inheriting from it. So we'll say data. It's private for now, unless we need something. And so all of those thises we just added. Now we just have direct operations on the data. And so what we are missing now is any interfaces that we were using as if this were a dictionary. So like add, probably, and indexing, stuff like that. Um, we need to expose those to be used like a database. But by picking and choosing what we're exposing, we have a lot more control over, like we don't want somebody to just write file system database.clear. We'd probably want them to say like clear for employee. Um, but with just a raw database, they can call whatever they want, or we can call whatever we want and mess it all up. Is really the motivator there. So let's we got no syntax errors over here. Let's go take a look at how we're using it in our game manager and add those interfaces that we need. So obviously we want some sort of way to get the file system for a particular employee. We could add a way to get the like a folder for a particular employee, which is how we're adding the virus file right now is literally just pick the first folder. Doesn't really matter. Um, it is slightly wonky in that our dictionary is actually a folder root, so there is always a top level folder, which is what this is. But a lot of the time when we generate uh, this sort of structure, because it's labeled as a work computer, a lot of the time our top level folder then becomes like their username or something like their department name, something like that. It's just kind of a little extra flair on how they organize their computer. Um, but maybe we add a accessor for like top level folder, and that's where we stick the virus file. Um, but let's go ahead and say if the file system database, we'll say public bool has employee data for a particular employee, we will return that. So what we are checking here is if we haven't yet added the virus to our very first employee, which is who you start the game as, and we've initialized a file system database, which we should have always done. It happens in the start, fixed update always happens after that. And the file system database has our currently logged in employee uh, has data. We do want to make sure that at this point they also have at least one folder, but I guess when they're initialized they will always have that folder. And then finally we want to say the database data for that employee has their folders initialized. So where is this defined? Folders. File system database. We would get back a folder, which I don't think that this is correct because the only reason we're doing this is because we are sticking it in the first folder of the root folder, which we don't actually need to do. We could just stick it in the root folder. But that's probably something we want to make a like intentional game design decision over of where do you stick the initial virus.exe file for the hacked employee. is it okay if it literally just is on the top level, you open their file system and it's there? Or would it make more sense to be like in a downloads folder somewhere? Or should you have to hunt for it in a random folder? I think for now what we'll do is we will stick it in the top level folder. But we will probably add a function to this file system folder class that returns some random child folder. So if we were to call random child folder on the top level folder, it could return itself. It could return any of these other folders within that top level folder. It could return some deeply nested folder. We'll probably just use like some sort of tree traversal down and then return randomly. And that might be nice for you jump on a new computer and you have to kind of hunt down where the virus file is. And then when you send it to another person, maybe it just goes to like downloads folder or something. I guess we could just always have it in a downloads folder. But either way, I think for now, just sticking it in the root folder until we decide where we want it to be is totally fine. But let's add this stubbed function for now. And it's the not implemented exception. There we go. Cool. So that'll remind us to come back to that. What we want to do is just stick it in the root folder, so we no longer need to check to see if the root folder has folders. We can just say let's say public fs folder root directory for there's probably some error checking here for making sure that that key exists, but we will say the root directory for the current user has a files list that we will add our new virus file to. And I feel like we probably want to just let's take a quick look at that folder. So files is just the list of files in that folder. Let's do an interface on this as well for don't know what we want to return for this. Let's leave it void for now in case we need something later. Add file. So it's a little nicer. And we probably should start making some of these like private. Well, we can come back to this as well. Want to make sure that we are stamping out all these compilation errors. So we still have an indexing error. So we haven't made it all the way through all of our other code yet, but let me see if there's still some game manager bugs. Here we just want to call that from the file system database since it lives there now. And this, we have a nice new helper function called as employee data. Okay, so when we are creating our empty file system, which should probably live over in this file system database, let's move that over. Call that twice, both times here. Let's go ahead and add a public initialize file system for and that will call our nice new private create empty file system if we don't already have one. So we'll say if has employee data employee. If we already have that, we want to return false, I guess, because we're not creating it, but otherwise we will create it and then return true. Okay, so in that case, we now want file system database dot initialize file system for that person. And same up here. So one thing I'm noting is that this code is very similar to this code. So I bet we can reuse this code down here. So what's happening up here is we're initializing the scene, which needs to happen here. But if we have someone logged in, we are generating their chat histories for the first time, generating their file system, and generating file systems for their contacts. Down here we are playing a sound, which probably shouldn't happen in the start. We're creating that generation status. And then we're doing the same thing we're doing up above. So this part is different. And this part probably should be stripped out, deduplicated, and the question is, where should that live? It's a lot of different responsibilities here, because it's not just the file system, not just conversations, and it's not even like it can't live on an employee, because it's also initializing a lot of stuff for their contacts as well. For now, let's strip out what is in common, and then we can move it and rename it later. So we will say initialize employee data, and to do this might make more sense to live somewhere else. So what we want is this, and now we initialize employee data for that employee. When we infect an employee, and we also do it for the very first employee when we first log in. Okay. So, I think we want to jump over to some of our other bugs now. But just want to browse through this file before we leave it. There's a few things that should probably live somewhere else, but we will come back to them. We've got our infect employee and initialize employee functions. We've got our fixed update, which basically is the other end of that, just making sure they complete correctly and managing our in progress stuff. So we might end up making some sort of class just for like a list of in progress generations so we can better manage all those without having all that logic live in the game manager. But we did a good job taking out all of the file system generation into somewhere that makes more sense. This is data, and that's our fancy new function. Cool. So let's take a look at some of these other errors, work through those as well. And just a reminder for anyone watching, if you join our Discord that is linked in the just below this video, I'm also in the voice channel. If you have any feedback or just want to hang out or ask questions, anything, you're always welcome to join. And feel free to hop in anytime. We'd love to have you. Cool. Let's take a look at our file browser window manager, which is what handles the file browser application when you're logged in as any user. So here we have an error when we navigate to the home directory, which is just the root directory. And we have a fancy function for that, so that looks like the only problem. We will say game manager. Let's see. So our question is, we expose these as like database services in the game manager. I guess we can just keep using them. It's a lot of chaining for something like this, but this is the logic here. Basically, when we navigate to the home directory, our folder to show is the root directory for the user we're currently logged in as. Just making sure we don't store that user somewhere. Wonder how many times we are. We grab it a lot. This looks like code from a previous stream when I was debugging stuff, so seems deletable. Let's just, yeah, I think I just copied all those and put them on individual statements so I could tell which one had a execution error. But we do hit that currently logged in as a bunch, so we could just cache that in the start as well, kind of clean up some of that. Why don't we do it? We're here. Say public corpo employee currently logged in user. That guy can happen here. And all of these, let's keep the naming consistent. Currently logged in as. But all these get to become a little cleaner. Cool. Alrighty, and I think we had one more file. Corpo chat window manager, which is the window for talking to a employee, which also allows dragging and dropping files in. So it looks like there is the only error. That would make sense. When we drag a file into that window, we have a onDrop event that fires with the file being dragged, and that executes on the window manager of the window it's being dragged onto. So let's just roll through the logic of this function real fast, make sure we're familiar properly. We are setting a user message for the AI prompt, which is just the user that sent you the file, their username, and the file's file name, which we still need to add the ability to rename files. Some of the more security hardened people will balk at you sending them a file named virus.exe, but if you were to say birthdaycard.exe, maybe they will execute it. When you send a file that exists in the file system but you haven't generated the contents yet, what we do is we fire off a background job that generates those file contents, and then once they're generated, it will call send file again with those contents. So it's kind of a delayed process before it sends, but we send it in the background, so it's kind of the same to the user. We have a nice little switch here for how we incorporate the file contents based on the file type. So for like text-based stuff, we have our message saying, Bob sent you a file, the contents of that file are this, and then the contents. So if you send them a text file full of commentary about what you think about your boss, or like your plans for a job, or why a project didn't go well, they're able to simulate opening that file, reading it, and responding to the actual contents in that file instead of just saying like, thanks for the file. For .exe files, we handle it a little bit differently. We have a special flag in our AI prompt for like actions that the agents can take on it. So I guess I can show that off real fast, but it's very simple right now. Basically, all they can do with files is send them or execute them. Let's see here. So we've got an action key that we incorporate into the prompt, and by default there's no action, but you can say file sent, and technically these coworkers can send you back files. I didn't code that in, that's just something they do sometimes, which I need to handle a little bit better, because sometimes they'll send you files that haven't been generated yet, and you kind of need to do the reverse of what we're doing for the player. But the important one is they can execute files according to the LLM. If you send them a file, they get a file with a file sent flag, and then from then on, they're able to send back a message that has the execute flag, which means along with their message, they have executed the file you sent. It's a little clunky, but it's working real well so far. We can add more actions later, like I don't know, starting voice calls or video calls, or like any like normal chat functions, I guess. Um, but one other thing that we will add is like PNG, JPG, etc. When we get our image generation working, right now we just have text generation with our model that we're working on. We are soon going to have it be a little more multimodal, where it can both do text and image generation. We will let images generate in the file systems as well. So if you if our AI that generates the file system originally generates a like company photo.png or something, when you click on that, it will use the image generation, generate uh, an image based on the file name, the team you're on, your boss's descriptions, stuff like that. It's a little more complicated because we need to ensure that like uh, I mean, things like hair colors and blah 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 stay the same, but we can probably get a pretty rough prototype working pretty well that doesn't need to stay consistent. And we're working on more like vector database stuff for ensuring that consistency in text too. So hopefully we can kind of reuse some of that for images. When you send the file, we then send the audio clip. At this point, we have all the contents of the file embedded into our user message for the AI prompt. So we create a file sent prompt, as you saw with that conversation. That's how file sent gets set to the AI, and that's why sometimes the AI will pick up on, oh, that's a valid key that can be sent to me, but I really need to send a file back, so I'll use it too. We redraw the messages in the UI because there's now a new message from us. We make our request, do it in the background, and then when we get a response back, we add that response to the UI as well. But the notable thing that we are fixing here is when you send them a file, obviously we want to add that file to their file system. So one thing that we've tossed around before is just making sure it always goes to like a downloads folder or something, but for now, until we know where files should live, we're just going to stick it all in the root directory. So we will do the same thing here. Say has employee data. If that file system for that employee has been initialized, which it should always, because anytime you are accessing a computer, all of their contacts file system should already be initialized as part of initializing that first computer. But we will say root directory for that person dot add file. So this will say grab that root directory for that employee and then add our sent file to it, which we probably want a little like if files dot contains does list have a contains function? Surely it does. Only, I mean, we can make it like a set or something, I guess, since you should never have files with the same name, right? Is it hard to switch this over to a set? Hash sets, what it said, I said. You know, maybe that's something we'll come back to. Doesn't matter too much. We'll say check for duplicates. You do it, AI. Cool. So now we want to return whether it was added or not. Cool. Not that we use that, but it's nice to have. Okay, so that should be the last of the errors. We will double check that. Cool, no errors. I get a lot of editor errors. You see me clear them. Uh, I'm looking for compilation errors. I'm actually not sure why I'm getting those editor errors. I think it's something in my preferences, but they're not a big deal because they don't actually apply when I am compiling and distributing to itch and stuff. So let's jump back to our game manager, see if there's anything else here that we can improve. The big thing that jumps out is obviously that like management system for generating employees. We could move all of that to the corpo employee class if we wanted to, but I'm not sure that's the best place for it to live, to be honest. I feel like we need some sort of like service in the middle for like managing representations of employees. So maybe what we do is head on over back to our conversation database, which we kind of skipped over at the beginning, but it's got a lot of duplicated code and it has kind of also duplicated data storage. So I'll kind of explain how this is working. I think I'll try and use like ChatGPT to get feedback on the best way to improve this. I have an idea for what I would probably do, but I'll get that second opinion, I guess. But basically what happens here is we have this conversation database, and it's a dictionary of tuples to conversation histories. So what that means is this tuple is a key of Alice's conversation to Bob, and that is separate from Bob's conversation to Alice. Right now, we duplicate all of the conversations in both places because they are the same. If you send a message to Bob, he's going to have received the same message you sent. It's just from a different point of view. So you'll see a lot of like our point of view, their point of view. They are intentionally split into these one-way conversations and duplicated because the player can interact as either of these people. And the intent is that they will know which messages they sent and which messages they didn't. So for example, if you have a conversation between Alice and Bob, where it's from Alice's perspective talking to Bob. Alice says, "Hello, Bob. How are you?" And we're talking about the real Alice in the games. This is their simulated conversation. Bob says, "I'm great. How are you?" If Alice looks at her conversation from this point, obviously it's her turn to respond. She's being asked how she is, and she'll probably respond with, like, "I'm great. Also, thanks." But what can happen is the at this point in the conversation, the player can be on Alice's computer, and the player can respond from Alice saying, "I suck and I quit." And so we haven't implemented a lot of this functionality yet because I don't know if it's leaning more towards too much towards like realism and less towards like fun, because it's more of a like stealth vibe at that point of like how do you not leave a trace. But if the player were to send this message and then we have some sort of schedule for the employees to look at their conversations and respond in the background, so like keeping the conversations going in this company between all these NPCs that you're not necessarily controlling. If Alice were to open up this conversation and see this thread, she would know that she didn't send this message. And so that's when she would say, "I didn't send that message. Maybe I've been hacked." Something like that. Maybe like alerting IT. That's when like the player gets in trouble, or like loses access to her computer. Like there's a lot of implications that you can have for leaving a trace, um, or like maybe we let the player delete messages after they send it, and it deletes from Alice's point of view, but not from Bob's point of view. So if the player sends this message and then deletes it, if Alice were to open up her conversation, it'd be back here. If Bob were to open up his conversation, he'd see this full thing. And we have those schedules in the background of like, should I respond to this message? If yes, generate a response, and so on. So you can see how like sending a message and then deleting it would cause a lot of confusion, which might be your intent or might be fun to watch, but it is a different kind of reaction than an NPC opening up their chat and being like, "Hey, a message was sent that I didn't send. Um, I'm going to like alert IT." So right now they're split like this, and what that means is there's two copies of this conversation stored, one with this key and one with this key, um, which isn't a big deal because conversations are pretty small. Um, and this gives us a little more flexibility in what we want to do later with kind of that chaos from the player being able to masquerade as any employee. Um, if the player sent this message, they could then like jump over to Bob's computer and also send like um, a message like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. You were actually really great." Um, but then they could like jump back to Alice's computer, delete this message. So when Alice opens up her conversation, this is now the conversations she sees. And I mean, you can kind of it's a little weirder for like guiding conversations that way, but you can probably bait someone into saying something like, "I really enjoyed spending time with you at work," and then like deleting a message. So it looks like you've kind of guided the conversation a different way. Alice opens up this conversation and says, "Oh, that's forward, lol. I'm sending you to HR." But for the time being, it's all in sync. So the conversations are all just duplicated in both directions. If you have opinions on what would be fun here, there's a lot you could do. Um, both like leaning towards that realistic stealth component of like you've actually infiltrated this company and real people are gonna know if you talk to their coworkers, or if you want to lean more into like the chaos power fantasy of like you say whatever you want and they are just going to believe that, oh yeah, I guess I did say that. I got to roll with the punches and double down on that. So we've kind of structured this in a way where we can go either way. We just got to figure out which way to go. But the two things that we wanted to do in this file, to jump back to our original goal here, we want to do the same thing we did in the file system database where we drop that down to a private data variable instead of exposing it directly. And we also want to build this like prompt replacement service so we don't have to duplicate this code. The only weird thing is it's just whose data gets put into which slot. So we can probably just stick that in a function and call that instead. But let's go ahead and let's first take this down. So we want to say private that data, and then anywhere we have this, we just want to use data. Still really liking having a extra spooky version to convert everything to light mode in the game. I think I'll do that. Cool, so we want to do that same process of working through all these other syntax errors now because those are interacting with the conversation database as if it were a dictionary, but now we need to add those effectively accessor methods for interacting with the data. So what's happening here in our Corpo chat window manager, which is the first window in the chat application that lists your contacts, where you click on a contact to then open a conversation with that contact. We're talking about that first contact list window here. So what we are doing, wait, I think that's, oh no, this is the actual conversation with that contact. So we are grabbing both conversations, which should be the same but just flipped. Can't remember why we're grabbing both. Oh, this is creating the conversation, I guess, if it doesn't yet exist, which it should currently, but I think we added this just so you can search for an employee who's not necessarily one of your contacts, open a conversation with them, and it will instantiate a blank conversation from both points of view. So what we will do is say we're grabbing both conversations. We want to see if a conversation exists between two employees, which we will pass as that tuple. Might make sense to make like a point of view class that just makes that a little nicer, but for now we'll say public bool conversation exists between tuple speaker and well, naming is hard. We'll say participants, which also inherently, like, this doesn't support group conversations, obviously. That might be something we want to add later, but haven't thought about it at all until just now, so we will see. So here we want to say, oh, we are getting the value and setting it. I see. So actually what we want to do is just clean this up a little bit, saying first of all, CDB. Nope, I hate that. We'll do this. We'll say if so if a conversation already exists between us and them, that's how we'll say it, then we will say public conversation history, conversation between, yeah, that looks right. We will say this conversation from our point of view is that. Otherwise, we create a new one. But I think the nicer, cleaner way to do this is probably find or create conversation between. And then we are doing effectively the same as what we were doing below, but more, a little cleaner. If there isn't an existing one, we create one, and if there was an existing one, we return it, otherwise we return the new one. So let's keep these for now, but what we'll do is say this conversation from our point of view is equal to conversation database dot find or create our point of view, and then we will do the same. I think it had it for me. From their point of view, yes, that's correct. And let me make sure we're not losing any logic here. It's just adding the empty one and setting it, so these can all collapse into that. And we could give this like an optional parameter later for like default conversation stuff, but it's probably fine for now. So the last thing we're doing here is just checking to see if that employee has been compromised, which is kind of, again, kind of the not where the logic should live, but I think it's fine for now. Let's check and see some of these other errors. I think that was all, but yeah, we didn't save this file. Let's see what we got. Also, you'll notice I'm in a new room this week. Just moved my office around a little bit. Next week I will have a new mic and a slightly newer computer as well. So hopefully the loading times work a little bit better. Hopefully my audio is a little bit better. Still working on the stream logistics, but I hope it's been getting better. Cool, so we have no more errors. We have some warnings. Let me just double check these. I think this is, yeah, I short-circuited that for testing. And then our assembly stuff. So what we could do now, let me kind of bring this in, did that. We still have the token replacement system to build. We abstracted out that file system database. So we probably have like at least 45 minutes more in the stream. We can probably do both of these. Building nice string builder token replacement system for our prompt system, which is somewhere. Basically, some kind of fun core C# just string manipulating stuff. Or the bigger task is probably to take all these scripts and sort them into logical boundaries for different assemblies that we can build so that we can import those assemblies in tests so we can make sure everything still works as we keep making this project bigger and bigger. Maybe the token replacement system is a little simpler to build first, so maybe we'll start with that. But bet we can get into kind of more high-level structuring of where systems should be decoupled versus coupled together right afterwards. So let's take a look at our problem code, which is what prompted all this to begin with, which was in the file system database. No, it was conversation database. So the two big problems that we're solving here are, one, this is super ugly code, which we basically do anytime we have a prompt that we want to substitute some data into. So if I go look at our prompts, for example, we have an employee conversation prompt, and it has tokens in place for you're an employee at the company name named this, your username is this, your job title is this, your boss's name is this, your personality is this, and so on. What we do is we grab that system message and we say, all right, so we have our employee object, we put in all that data, and then since we're also using that same prompt to generate responses from whoever they're talking to, we do the exact same thing, but from the other person's perspective, where we give Alice gets a prompt saying you're an employee named Alice, blah, 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 here's your personality. Bob gets a prompt saying you're an employee named Bob, here's your personality. And we also pass through the list of existing messages so far in the user prompt. So what'll happen is you'll go back and forth basically of the prompt for Alice will generate a message for Alice. The prompt for Bob will incorporate that message from Alice, generate a message for Bob. The prompt for Alice will incorporate that message, generate another response, and so on. So we probably want some sort of nicer way to do this. I think we even have it happening in a few places. Let's say like message.replace will probably hit them. Yeah, conversation database, but also fill prompt with replacements. I think this is what we started on another stream, so maybe we can get that working in place. Actually, I think that's what we use down here. Maybe, maybe not. fill prompt with replacements. So this basically lets us build a dictionary of these replacements and pass that dictionary in and return a new prompt with those replacements. So we could do that up here as well. We still want to pull that logic out into another function, and that function should probably live on the prompt object, or we can improve the one we literally have already. But just because we're kind of inundated with so much repeat code right now, let's go ahead and just start simplifying it a little bit, and then we can make some decisions. So we will say private string will this actually work? So we want to pass in our prompt or a string, I think. Probably the prompt and replacements. So generate new prompt with string replacements. Base prompt, dictionary of token to replacements, and that I imagine will probably autocomplete, but what we're probably going to do is just the same thing as up here. So we will say base prompt dot system message. I don't think we want that. We want base prompt dot fill prompt with replacements. And so that will return a new prompt. Now, why do we need this function if it's already one line now? And the answer is the real meat and potatoes of what duplicates the code and makes it many lines is just setting up that dictionary in the first place, I guess. So let's actually say private dictionary string generate employee data replacements. And we will build this sort of thing or this sort of thing in here. So we can say return new dictionary string, and that we'll have we probably want to pass in two employees, one for us and one for them. So we have employee and contact for us and them. This would be us, this would be them. Same down here. And we could pass in some sort of like mask for like which replacements to do, but it seems fine if we just include them all. If a string doesn't include like this token, it's not going to replace anything anyway, so it's probably fine. So we'll say just us and them for now. I might change that naming, but this lets us say, maybe we just copy these for now. What do we have? These are all us. I feel like we're missing some that we might steal from up above. And this is them. Man, it might be nicer to be like our and their. Don't know which one's nicer. We'll come back. But that lets us say, instead of this, we would have prompt filled out prompt equal to GameManager.instance.back. The backfill conversation prompt dot fill with replacements of employee and contact. What did I miss? Fill prompts with replacements. Oh, right. We want, this takes in a dictionary, right? Yeah. Generate employee data replacements for employee and contact. So that's quite the long line, but it's fine for now. I think when we figure out how we want to be loading in these prompts, we'll probably have a little bit nicer syntax, but this is the core logic of really what we want. So we can actually do the same thing up here and say, here we have our replacements is equal to generate data replacements for employee contact. So we'll be able to use that below. But the things that we need to think through are, one, this is modifying a system message to add it to the history, which we can still do by generating the new prompt and then using that new prompt system message. And we want to make sure that we include all these tokens that we didn't necessarily include down here. And we want to make sure they're from the correct perspective as well. So I think rather than start with the quote-unquote reversed one, let's go ahead and start with the normal one so we can make sure that everything is in the right orientation, and then we should be able to just do the exact same thing down here and switch contact and employee. But let's grab these. Let's make sure that we have all those tokens. So paste them down here. We have corp name, we have full name, username, job title, and personality. Source full name, source job title, source personality, and also username, I guess. That's fine. Boss name. We probably want source boss name. And we want growth goals. Our professional goals. And their growth goals. And I feel like source has kind of outlived its nomenclature where it made sense, but maybe we can come back to that as well. So that is all the tokens that we use. Even if a prompt doesn't necessarily use one of those tokens, it'll still be fine because it just won't get replaced. It's not like it's adding more in. So this should be fine. So now we have our replacements set up here. We can say prompt filled in prompt is equal to game manager dot instance dot prompt coworker response dot replace with replacements. I think that is right. And then this just gets to be dot system message. Is that right? Yes. The side effect is we are duplicating this in memory because we don't want to be editing the actual prompt, like the original prompt in memory with these data values. So we are creating a second one and returning it, which should get garbage collected at the end of the closure, but um, you know, that's the implication there of it's probably not a big deal since it's a small string, but um, that's what we're doing. Cool. So I'm gonna take a look at this real fast. Conversation history. I feel like this we actually want to say we want to initialize chat messages if it's not already initialized before adding, just for robustness sake, I guess. So we'll just add in if chat messages is equal to null. This is actually not what we're using anymore, but I guess it's kind of the same as, does this have chat message as well? Yes, okay. So let's switch that over as well. Cool. So now this makes sure that if we ever try and add a message to a conversation history, it at least has the underlying list that we can add to, which is what we want. And that lets us clean up just a little bit more wherever it was we just were here. So we no longer need to, well, I guess we do need to still add this. This is what adds that conversation history. That's fine. Yeah, I was actually wondering why this didn't, or why it wouldn't already do that if this is initialized up here. I guess it is. So disregard everything I just said. It's fine. So cool. Let's clean up that comment. We will say initialize a conversation for each pair. We add the empty conversation history for our point of view, and we build up a prompt for the system message to start that conversation. And then we use that system message with our repeated user message generation to generate the actual conversation. So we should be able to do the exact same thing down here, but with contact an employee, I think. Though that seems incorrect. I want to take a look at this. Yes, I think actually this guy should be contact an employee because we have full name pulling from contact.fullname. Full name should be our full name. So the naming's a little bit odd on these guys, but this guy is contact an employee, and this guy is employee and contacts. And let's just make sure there's no other tokens we're missing. Looks good. And we will grab that new prompt and use it. Cool. Okay, so we can probably clean this up a little more, but I'm not sure we need to. We have our conversation histories. We're initializing both. This is probably what I would clean up. This logically probably doesn't belong here. We probably want somebody else to manage like relationship scores from generated conversations rather than coupling that all together. But we're initializing relationship scores to 0. We're initializing empty conversations between each pair. Those conversations start with a system prompt filled out with the proper variables. Both of them do. So maybe this is where we say public void prepare conversation history for backlog generation. And we say, actually, what did that have? Is that, no, that's not what we want. Almost though. Because I think what would be nice is if we could just say, prepare that for our POV and their POV, and then we will have them all ready for generation. So we will say tuple of corpo employee and corpo employee participants. And we will say if the data doesn't already have let's say station exists, then we add an empty one. We say participant stuff first, or item 1, I guess. Right? Yeah. Participant stuff item 2. So we fill in our replacements, get our initial system prompt, and we use that POV to add that system message as the first message in the conversation between these participants. And I think what we should do is say that returns the conversation history, and then we can turn find or create and most importantly we can combine these as well. But let's think through the logic on that real fast. This works for when we are initializing the first conversation for doing that backlog generation. If a conversation already exists, we won't be filling that system message, and we will be returning that existing conversation, which logically seems fine, but might be a little confusing given the name. So, is that fine? So if you have an existing conversation between Alice and Bob, and you were to call prepare for backlog generation, which we wouldn't do, I guess, but it would just return that conversation instead of adding a system message effectively or initializing it again. So I think that's great. I think that's fine. I think it's just um, maybe we say like initialize conversation history for backlog generation or something. It's not the best name, but it implies that it's for new conversations that haven't had data set in it before, and also implicitly implies like why we're adding this data to it. It's for backlog generation. Cool. So this function is looking a lot cleaner now. We still want to move this to some relationship library. We are creating a point of view. We still could do like a point of view class just for the syntactic sugar here, but I think it's fine because we don't know that we'll keep one, this sort of duplication, two-way duplication between multiple conversations or one conversation stored multiple times. And also, even if we'll keep it just one-on-one conversations versus like a list of employees or something like that. So we'll keep that for now. We are initializing our default conversations. So if we say generate chat histories for Alice, um, who is them? Where did we get contact? Oh, right, this is in a list loop. So for each of Alice's contacts, we are creating a new conversation with them and generating that filled in system prompt, and then generating the actual meat of that conversation. And so there is the case of if you have Alice, Bob, and Carol, and all three of them have each other as contacts. There's a slight edge case here of we start the game as Alice, so we've generated conversations between Carol and Bob. If we then hack Carol, we generate a conversation between Alice and Carol again, which is when we would get this alternative route of just returning the existing conversation, which is what we want, because we don't want to recreate a new conversation in that case. And so what we're doing here is if the conversation from Carol to Alice already exists, we just mark it as done. And then we shouldn't do this. We are doing this. We probably shouldn't do this. So I think we want to think through this function a little more. So if this employee already has messages in a conversation, we don't need to generate. I see. So what we're really doing is we're generating the conversation, or we're getting the existing conversation. We're marking it as done, but then we're also generating more messages in the conversation, which I don't think we need to do. I think the dream for how we want to handle messages is give each employee a background timer where they look at all of their conversations and we do a little uh, categorization or filtering or something of which conversations do I need to reply to. And if any of those are a yes, then we generate a response. I don't think there's a case where we want to have an existing conversation and then generate like 10 more messages too, or something like that all at once, because that might be a little jarring for the player if they have a conversation with somebody, they hack that person, and then they open the conversation back to the person they came from, and there's more messages. So let's take a look at this, and I think we want to skip over generating more if there's already messages. But let's make sure that that's exactly what we're doing and we understand it properly. Let's also clean up this helper function we never ended up using. Alright, so for our employee, from our employee's point of view, if there are already messages from us to them, we mark that conversation as complete. And this would also apply to us as like game developers if we want to hard code in a conversation between Daryl and Evan, saying like arguing over a promotion. We want to make sure that that conversation that's hard coded in stays there, and we could generate more messages on top of it, but I don't think that we should. I think for just for the sake of like storytelling, we want to have a lot of generated content, but I think the core story that we tell from each employee, we don't want to bury with that generated content. We want to lean on it for like the player experiencing it from the point that we've built. But we don't want to write a whole script of conversation and then as soon as they start the game, they have 10 more messages on top of that we can't guarantee are like going to go in any correct direction or correct direction. I think we can build the point of takeoff and then let the player say like, where do I want to take this from? And then we use the generative AI for allowing them to go where they want to go. But we've set the stage effectively for the story we want to tell. So what's happening here also seems like a minor bug. Um, the way our in-progress infection generations work is when we infect an employee, we say they have 8 contacts. We set their chat history is generated to 0, and then we go through this loop. If any of them already have a chat message history, we increment it because we can skip it. Oh, I see. Okay, there's a continue here, so we are actually skipping this. This isn't a bug at all, but I'll keep explaining. Um, if anyone already has a chat history, we don't need to generate it. So we mark it as done, and we continue. So we're not going to generate the uh, conversation from this backfill prompt. But if they don't have a conversation, then we do generate a conversation which produces a history in JSON, which we parse and build that data structure that we manage. And then we do the same thing. We add a chat history generated to our counter. And all the game manager is doing is checking to see if that counter equals the number of contacts. And then when the number of contacts matches the number of conversations generated, we mark it as done. We check that box, and then we wait for the file system generation box to be checked, and any other boxes that need to be checked before that generation is fully done, and you can switch to that person's computer. But I didn't see this line earlier, so I thought this was going to be a bug where we needed, for example, like if you had a chat history already generated, and then we queued up a generation, and then when that was done, it incremented the counter, so it'd be marked done before all the conversations were done, but that's not the case. I write perfect code, and obviously what I thought was a bug was not a bug, so. Cool. So this is looking better. I think the two main logistical things that we want to think about fixing are where should relationship scores between employees be handled? Probably shouldn't be handled in the conversation database. And where should the game manager's tracking of in-progress infection generations be handled? Which really, I think as soon as we come up with a better name for that, we'll have a better idea of like where that should live, because it kind of comes down to like I keep coming back to should it live on the corpo employee, because that structure, it's a scriptable object that holds all of the data for a certain employee, but that doesn't include all of their files, their conversations, their activity logs, stuff like that, which will be different every time you play the game. But it would logically make sense for it to have a function that generates all that and tracks like, has this employee been properly generated to insert into the game yet? It could be a place that we store that logic, the business logic, as it was. Um, so, one thing we haven't done in a while is go make sure we don't have more syntax errors, which I'm realizing I halfway switched this over to our Chroma LLM service in one file, but I thought I had migrated us everywhere, and I'm now realizing I think that was in a different project, so I probably want to revert that and import those changes instead of making them manual. But what's going on here? Right, so yeah, I probably just want to Where did I make those changes? Yeah, let's switch these guys back to OpenAI, and then when I import in our Chromagolem asset, we can just use that instead. But this is real nice for testing. Cool. So that should probably fix all the errors. We shall see. Very cool. So we've got at least a couple minutes left on the stream. What I would like to do is, first of all, I want to check in all of our changes in one giant commit. And I'm sorry, Andrew. Stream refactoring and code cleanup. And then I think what we want to do is just make a new computer's coming soon. I'm waiting for parts. I want to make a first pass on uh, how we want to organize a lot of these scripts into different assemblies. Right now they're all in one big assembly, which, as I understand it, makes it really hard to write tests and makes compile times longer and makes it harder to reuse code across projects, stuff like that. So we have tons and tons of scripts, and they're all very coupled together. So we've checked in all of our changes. I'm now going to make a ton of probably breaking changes, but we'll see, on just reorganizing where everything in the project is. So we'll just start from the top. We've got our data folder, which is probably honestly fine. It just holds all of the instances of our scriptable objects. I'm not 100% sure whether that needs to be in the same assembly as like where those scriptable objects are defined. Maybe so. Let's go ahead and let's create a placeholder folder for like reorganization, and let's move stuff into that as like system level stuff. So let's say employees, and let's bring over all of our employees into a employees system or something. We probably want a like Windows, like our operating system. We will call it Yana OS, obviously, for your not Alice operating system. We can bring over all of our window managers, our remote control manager. I can't remember what that is, but we can at least bring in over our window managers. Let's create a little folder for that. Let's see here. We probably, I mean, everybody does allegedly the core thing, which is where I would imagine like game manager would go. We'll see, we'll see. We probably want like UI components, all the managers for like our balloon pop-up, clickable app drawer objects, the more low-level stuff compared to like powering an entire application. So let's grab some of those. Clickable doc object, app drawer and click. contact display. Pretty much all of these are just powering the UI. So progress bar. Desktop background images get loaded off the user, which is one of those cases where like that is a coupling between the UI and the employees component. So we'll see how that works. Persist between scenes probably goes into like core person tool display. Okay, so that's probably what we want in the UI folder. And I'm actually not sure how these like subfolders will work if I create an assembly definition in like the parent folder. So we will see how that works. It's kind of, I do know that our prompt system is going to move to our Chroma Golem library. So that'll be a nice simplification of this project if we can go ahead and abstract all that out. So probably in this operating system folder, we also want like file systems as a component. So we've got folder, we've got a file. Is there anything else that we needed? It's probably fine. We'll take out our empty data directory now. We'll grab our file system database. That'll be a good one. And a lot of these are more back to like proper game control, like player managers and stuff like that. So it's feeling better if we can have like a core game assembly that is like player movement and stuff like that, and that uses different assemblies for like interacting with the computer or generating files, generating conversations. I'm still pretty new to testing in Unity, which is why I'm going through all this assembly creation, but I guess we can learn together. Let's say conversations we don't necessarily need to be in quote unquote part of the operating system, especially if later we can, like, you can walk over to a phone and make a phone call to someone, or like send an email or a letter, or however we want to do conversations. Right now they're all over a single application, but there's lots of other ways we could do it. So maybe we put that under like people or like world or something. So let's go ahead and say people. And then we'll change this to employee data. We'll put that in people. And we will have conversations as another system within the people assembly. So we'll have conversation history, that guy, conversation database. Let's grab our file system database that I forgot. And anything else about like people? We got player controller. We probably want like a cutscenes or like camera work assembly for like pulsing and zooming and panning and cutscene controller. So I think we can just add that as a subdirectory in core for now. let's say cutscene, or we can go fancy, let's call it director. We'll call it cutscenes. Let's see. Let's grab our employee. Let's put him in employee data. Not sure where the corporation should live. It's not really used that much other than just kind of a container for just a list of employees almost. So, unsure why it's okay. It's more for later when, for example, if you want a mode where you generate a whole corporation, you might give it a name and like some details about it, and then we can generate the all the employees, the whole like topological map of relationships between employees, all their wants and likes and dislikes and all that. That'll probably all live in the corporation. But in this initial like demo, we are leaning more on the handcrafted, like telling a story mode effectively for this kind of evil corporation that you're infiltrating. But even though that mode kind of plays somewhat different each time you play because the conversations will be different, the strategies will be different. I think it would be really cool to have a separate mode where everything is completely random and you don't know what you're getting into. The company might be like the greatest company of all time and you don't realize that, or it might be like hilariously evil or a little bit of both. So I think the more like I like the roguelike aspects of like investigating what's this company doing, what are these people doing, but right now we're focusing more on just the story-driven demo of the first company, but I'm excited to be able to generate entire companies later. Um, so maybe we'll just stick that in core for now. Let's just use core for stuff that doesn't really belong anywhere else for now. So let's say 3D stuff. We got our player view manager. Uh, for remote control manager is, let me look at that code again, but I think it's what manages like logging into a new computer, initializing everything. Yeah, handling like the audio on that computer, switching between computers. So it can probably live in like a high level YANA OS remote control folder. Start screen manager is just our like loading screen when you first start up the game. We'll stick that in core. So we've cleaned up databases, managers, and models. We're to repeat, we are kind of just we had a large directory of scripts that was somewhat organized before, but everything was very tightly coupled. So we are preparing to add more separated assemblies for the organization, and we want to reorganize the folders into a more systems-based organization scheme. So you got a core system broken down into some stuff. Bad example. You've got a people system that has like a conversation system, the employee data system for managing all those personalities. You've got the operating system, which has file system, UI system for like all the different applications on the computer, um, and so on. So I don't know if this is a great way to organize things. I have always organized them more like how we had them before, of kind of the logical, here's all the data, here's all of the uh, managers. Here's all of the uh, just structures, stuff like that. But that does make it really easy for uh, coupled stuff to crop up, or makes it really hard to find, like, oh, I'm working in the file system. What's all the related files to that? Or what are all the related classes I should be aware of? Um, and we're just about done kind of cleaning this up. Just want to get the last of these files in somewhere. We'll say zoom and pan, pulse object, and those are our cutscene guys. We'll have persist between scenes in the core player controller in 3D. And in case you missed it earlier, we did add a 3D scene this week. Um, Basically, when you're using the computer, you can press escape and you zoom out from the computer screen and you're in a 3D environment. It's cool. It could be a really cool like story reveal, um, or it could be cool for just some like contextual realism. Could be cool for giving the player a little more things to juggle, like if somebody is knocking on the door when they're trying to do something on the computer, or like if they're looking out the window and I don't know, like the apartment across the street is one of the employees and you have to know when they're home or not. There's more cool stuff we can do. You can walk over to the phone and like take an audio call with AI generated audio or receive messages that way or something like that where you're not necessarily just staring at a computer screen the whole time you're playing because you're already staring at a computer screen, but it's kind of a cool way to pull back the curtain and offer a few other ways to interact with this world that we're generating. Um, so could be cool, could be not. I've added it and I didn't spend a lot of time on it yet, but if you guys have ideas on what would be cool, feel free to either drop them in stream comments or jump on Discord anytime. We're always working on fun stuff, so uh, Discord links down below. Let me just double check. This is the tutorial balloon stuff, so we'll throw that in core as well. So everything is now organized, allegedly, and we have these high-level systems. We have core, we have people, and we have the operating system. So I'm not going to write tests this week because we've gone a little over, and that's fine, but I don't necessarily know how they all work, so I want to do a little more research on that. But I think if we were to take these guys out, bring them back up to our scripts directory, delete our reorganization temporary directory, we can probably create an assembly in like the core or people directory or wherever. Let's do the people directory. Create assembly definition. We say people. It's named people. Seems fine. If we then go over to our tests, and I don't think there's a special create for tests. I think you just create the script. Okay. We say people tests and edit mode tests. We do need to know how to like link this guy. So I think maybe edit mode and play mode was not the correct Let's create a folder real fast, say people tests. Let's bring over our people tests here. Actually, we don't want to create the folder like that. We want to create a tests assembly folder called people tests. And in that, we get our people tests thing, and we can add people, hopefully, cool, as a definition reference. Then we can create a, I don't know what I just said yes to. Hopefully that was fine. Create a people tests file. And let's see if we can run a test that references people, even though we apparently have tons and tons of errors. Right. So where is our OpenAI service? That. So that guy lives in the Chroma Golem. He's up here. So I think what we would do, and now I'm just kind of spitballing, so we will see what works and what doesn't. If we create an assembly definition in our Chroma Golem folder, that's what we'll end up doing in our asset as well, I believe. We say Chroma Golem. Then in our erroring people conversations conversation history, people, we can add Chroma Golem as a reference to this assembly. So we should be able to access the classes in that assembly, I thought. But apparently not. Oh, I need to apply. Hopefully that works. Did I need to apply it anywhere else? This is people. This is Chroma Golem. Failed to find. Oh no, I've broken it all. Yeah, this is about what I expected once we started adding assemblies, because it feels like you need to add them all to each of your core people operating systems, and you need to properly link between them. As I said, like the whole reason we're doing this is because everything is so coupled. Like the conversation database relies on game manager, which makes some sense. Game manager is in core, so we need to set up the people assembly to rely on core, which makes sense. And likewise down here, like the people assembly probably shouldn't rely on the operating system's like window drawing. It should be the other way around. The window manager should be relying on the people assembly for like getting its data, and then it chooses how to manage it. So that's kind of like the motivator of why we are reorganizing this stuff. But I do need to research a little more on like best practices and watch more videos, read more stuff on like why these assemblies work the way they are, what we should do with them. So I'm going to go ahead and call it this week. We made a lot of good progress. Let me bring up our, so we built our better system, and I'd say we figured out like roughly what assemblies we want. We didn't necessarily um, dive deep into that, but I think that's fine. Next week maybe we'll get it into tests. But that was kind of more of a bonus for this week. So I'd say we did real well. There's a lot more to be done. I think there's a lot of really cool potential with this game. There's a lot of cool potential with AI in general. My co-founder and I are working on some other demos as well. I know he's working on a multiplayer thing right now, which looks really cool. So if you guys are interested in AI or gaming or game dev or AI in game dev or AI in gaming, all of the above, be sure to check out our um, Discord. It is linked below, but we got about 100 people in here right now, and we stream every Tuesday, stream game dev every Tuesday. We are doing some more game streams. We might host a game jam soon. We've got bots in here to help you like get questions about how things work in Unity, how things work in Godot, how things work in Unreal even. Um, you've got a brainstorming channel. We got lots of cool stuff. So if you are interested at all in gaming or game dev, uh, check out the link in the description. It's, let's see here, bring it up for you. If you want to play the game that we were working on stream this week, it's up on my personal itch.io, or also if you go to chromagolem.itch.io, you can play it there as well. You can play it in your browser for free. It's fun. We also have a previous game where it's a like retro brawler, and there's a conversational component there where once you've beat up enough people, the cops show up and you have to lie to them and convince them you're innocent so you can keep brawling in the streets. It's pretty fun. We built it in a week for a game jam, but it kind of was the precursor of You Are Not Alice, which is like a really, really large scale version of lying to everyone, which is cool. And if you are in the stream, let me mute myself. But if you're in the stream, just scroll on down. We got Discord right here. You can follow us on Twitter. Um, or just follow me on Discord or on Twitch, I mean. I stream every Tuesday on this channel, and my co-founder Andrew, he streams as well, and we both ping on Discord when we go live. So thanks for joining me this week. Hope you guys had fun. Um, let me know if you want to keep working on this game next week, or we've got some other demos in progress. Happy to jump around, happy to prototype some other cool stuff. So let me know what you think. So I will see you guys next week, or see you around on Discord. See ya.